My brother said I was worthless. Then Grandma's $2 million inheritance made me his silent partner. But the real fortune wasn't the money, it was the fiercely guarded lawyer who taught me the cost of true love. Before we jump right into this insane story, please make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one of these life-changing episodes. The smell of roasted malt and piney Chinook hops had been the cologne of Julian's life, a warm, comforting blanket woven from years of early mornings and stained work shirts at the Copper Kettle Brewery. Now the scent felt like a phantom limb, a painful reminder of what was being severed. The office, David's office, now was sterile, the original dark wood desk replaced with a sheet of tempered glass that seemed to reflect only the cold, fluorescent light. David, Julian's elder brother by 6 years and the self-appointed CO, slid a manila envelope across the glass. "It's a generous severance package, Julian," David said, his voice flat, professional, the tone he reserved for vendors he was about to strong-arm. David's arc was about spreadsheets, profit margins, and a ruthless pursuit of scale. Julian's was about the craft, the delicate science of fermentation, the soul of the beer. Julian didn't touch the envelope. His eyes were fixed on the original, tarnished brass plaque above the door that read, "A Family Heritage, established 1978. Generous? David, I've spent 15 years in this place. I mixed the first batch of the IPA that kept us afloat in '08. This isn't just a job. It's ours." "It was ours," David corrected, leaning back, the leather of his executive chair groaning a soft protest. "You're a brilliant brewer, I'll give you that. But you're a terrible businessman. You want to cap production, focus on boutique, expensive specialty batches. I need volume. I need efficiency. I need someone who doesn't treat the tanks like they're pets. I need to take us national." He tapped the envelope impatiently. "The truth is, Julian, you're dead weight on the balance sheet. You're holding us back." The words landed not as a slap, but as a deep, surgical cut. Julian felt the heat rise from his neck, his jaw clenching so hard he could hear the faint click in his ears. He wasn't just being fired, he was being erased from the legacy he'd helped build. The betrayal was a thick, bitter taste, sharper than any overhopped brew. "Show don't tell," Julian's internal struggle. "Grandma Evelyn wouldn't have done this," Julian whispered, the name of their late grandmother, the company's true founder, an emotional symbol they rarely spoke of. David scoffed. "Grandma Evelyn was a romantic dreamer, Julian. We're in the 21st century. Sign the non-disclosure agreement. Clean out your locker by 5. Julian didn't sign. He didn't speak. He simply stood, his massive shadow briefly eclipsing David's neat desk, picked up the key to the original brewhouse. A large, heavy skeleton key he'd always kept, and placed it gently on the glass. The metallic clink was the loudest sound in the room. He walked out, leaving the severance package untouched. His body felt hollow, a drum beaten to silence. He drove away, watching the red brick facade of the Copper Kettle shrink in his rearview mirror, the scent of the past fading with every mile. He was in exile, alone, adrift. 2 weeks later the call came. It was from a law firm he'd never heard of, a sleek, intimidating name, Sterling and Thorne. The receptionist's voice was clipped, formal, inviting him to an urgent reading of a codicil to Evelyn's will. Julian almost hung up. What could a codicil possibly change now? The office of Sterling and Thorne was located in a towering steel and glass structure downtown. The air was chilled, smelling faintly of expensive leather and polished marble, a world away from the honest grit of the brewery. Julian was directed to the office of a junior partner named Anya Petrova. Anya. Vivid sensory details, setting the scene. She was 29, looked 39, and carried herself with the stillness of a predator that had learned to wait. She sat behind a massive, dark cherrywood desk, her posture impeccable. Her charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. Her eyes, an astonishing ice blue, barely flickered up as Julian entered. She didn't offer a hand, only a terse nod toward the opposite chair. Flawed but lovable characters. Anya is guarded and seemingly cold. "Mr. Holloway," Anya began, her voice a low, precise instrument, with a faint, unidentifiable accent that Julian couldn't place. He was used to the easy warmth of people who worked with their hands. Anya was a creature of sharp edges and absolute control. "I am the executor of a highly specific trust established by your grandmother, Evelyn Holloway." Julian shifted, uncomfortable. A trust? Why wasn't this part of the original reading? Anya placed a heavy leather-bound folder on the desk. Because it was conditional. It was only to be activated if you were to find yourself at a professional and emotional crossroads outside the established family structure. Her words, not mine. The recent severance from the copper kettle triggered the clause, as did documentation of its financial volatility under current management. Anya opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward him. It was a statement from an offshore account. The number at the bottom made Julian's vision blur. $2,100,000. $2 million, Julian murmured, the paper suddenly feeling like a live wire. From Grandma? Specifically from the sale of her original pre-family business investment in a tech startup, Anya explained, devoid of any emotional inflection. It was her contingency fund. The money is now yours, held in a revocable trust, which I manage. Anya leaned forward slightly, and Julian caught a fleeting scent of something crisp and cool, like linen and faint citrus. However, there is a mandate, she continued, her voice hardening. The money is to be used only to purchase your complete, controlling interest in the brewery, or, failing that, to start a competing venture and ensure your financial security. You cannot touch the principal for personal expenses. And I, as the trustee, have final legal authority on every expenditure. I'm not your lawyer, Mr. Holloway. I am the guardian of your grandmother's intent. My job is to make you self-sufficient, and frankly, my initial assessment of your file suggests that will be a considerable challenge. Julian felt an uncomfortable mixture of elation and fury. The money was his weapon, his vindication. But this woman was the lock, and she clearly thought him too inept to handle the key. He looked at the statement, then at Anya's unyielding face. So you're telling me, Julian said, managing to keep his voice level, that my inheritance comes with a warden? Anya's lips barely curved, a gesture that was either a ghost of a smile or pure disdain. I am telling you, Mr. Holloway, that your grandmother ensured the money would not be squandered on artisanal hops and sentimental vanity. We work together, or the principal remains untouchable. Your choice. Deep, authentic, emotional dialogue. The power dynamic is established. The world had just thrown Julian a lifeline, but it came with an anchor. He looked past her, out the window, where the city sprawled in a relentless march of commerce. The cold, hard reality of this new arrangement, working with this fiercely intelligent, utterly detached woman, was replacing the cozy pain of the past. The stakes had been raised. The game was no longer about family, it was about power, legacy, and the unexpected intersection with a woman who represented everything he wasn't. Julian sighed, running a hand over his tired face. All right, Miss Petrova. Let's talk about purchasing my brother's shares. He met her icy gaze, a flicker of renewed purpose in his own. The next 3 weeks were a deep dive into the corrosive reality of the business Julian had once loved blindly. Anya insisted on using an impersonal, windowless conference room in her firm's building, a bunker of polished mahogany and cold air conditioning. She organized the brewery's financial records, David's tenure, into towering labeled stacks, profit and loss, debt servicing, supply chain overheads, and the frighteningly thick folder labeled expansion capital. The valuation is surprisingly low given the brand loyalty, Anya stated one late Tuesday evening, sliding a ledger toward him. She wore reading glasses that softened the severity of her face, but her voice remained sharp, cutting through the silence. However, the operating expenses are inflated by nearly 20% year over year. Where is this money going, Mr. Holloway? David claims it's necessary infrastructural upgrades. Julian pushed the expansion capital file aside, his brow furrowed. He picked up the supply chain document. Look at the malt supplier, Miss Petrova. Gale & Sons. David switched to them 6 months ago. Their volume seller's cheap. The barley they provide is inferior. It burns faster, the yields are erratic, and you need more enzyme boosters to compensate. That's money being spent to cover up poor quality ingredients. Julian ran his thumb over the line item, the ink feeling greasy under his touch. Vivid sensory details, connecting the paper data back to the physical reality of brewing. Anya paused. She hadn't expected the brewer to know the granular cost difference between two types of barley. She had been operating purely on macroeconomic models. Julian's intimate knowledge of the process was a variable she couldn't quantify. Interesting, she conceded, the single word a grudging admission of his value. So, these infrastructural upgrades are compensating for ingredient downgrade. Exactly, Julian snapped, slapping the paper down. His exhaustion was starting to wear thin his patience. David is prioritizing immediate cash flow by sacrificing the product's integrity. He's running the brewery like a machine designed only to print money. My grandmother, she'd see this as a betrayal of the craft. He's gutting the soul of the place. Deep, authentic, emotional dialogue, highlighting the clash between P1's emotional view and P2's professional view. Sentimentality will not win the negotiation, Mr. Holloway, Anya countered immediately, clicking her pen. We need leverage. David is not selling because he fears the market knows he's drowning in debt. He's selling because he believes he's too big to fail and will simply buy you back later for less. I need empirical proof of malfeasance or significant, undisclosed risk. Not complaints about malt quality. Julian felt the familiar burn of frustration. He picked up the heavy brass skeleton key he still carried, the one from the original brewhouse, and fidgeted with it, the cold metal a comfort. You see numbers? I see a legacy bleeding out. You don't understand what it means to care about something enough to want to protect it, regardless of the cost. Anya's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. The faint scent of citrus seemed to sharpen in the room. Heavy subtext and meaningful silence. She stared at the spreadsheet, not at him. Mr. Holloway, my professional objectivity is my strength. Do not mistake caution for apathy. I understand the cost of negligence all too well. The comment was a stone dropped into deep water, a reference to a backstory he couldn't grasp, but the sudden stiffness of her body spoke volumes. She rarely used I. For the next 2 hours they worked in strained silence. Julian pored over the old logistics records, trying to remember historical costs. Anya worked her way through the complex loan covenants David had signed. The air was thick with the faint metallic tang of cheap takeout coffee and the silent frustration of two people forced into a high-stakes partnership. Around midnight, a breakthrough, not a grand revelation but a tiny, telling flicker. Julian was looking at old utility bills for the aging cold storage facility. Wait, he muttered, pointing to an anomalous spike 3 months prior, only partially reconciled. This power usage jump, it's too high for just refrigeration. We were running the older backup boiler for a week that month, remember? But David sold the boiler as scrap metal a year ago. I saw the invoice. Anya's ice blue eyes snapped down to the line item. She cross-referenced the utility spike with a disbursement from the infrastructural upgrade budget. The numbers didn't match the reported purpose. A small, 5-figure discrepancy. Trivial but nagging. It's being used to pay off a short-term, high-interest personal loan David took out, masked as a supplier retainer, Anya deduced, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up a secondary document that had been buried deep in the firm's external audit files. Her voice was suddenly quick, energized, stripped of its legal formality. It's sloppy. Highly illegal use of corporate funds to service personal debt. He thinks the sheer volume of data will obscure the trivial losses. She looked up at Julian and the professional mask slipped. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parted in a brief, genuine expression of triumph and relief. It wasn't the cool detachment of a lawyer who just found a winning point, it was the raw exhilaration of someone who had successfully solved a maddening puzzle. The emotional spark, a fleeting moment of genuine connection. You were right, she breathed, the faint accent more pronounced in her rush of words. Your knowledge of the brewery's true workings, it was the key to unlocking the truth of his deceit. The compliment, delivered with such rare, unguarded sincerity, hit Julian with unexpected force. It was the first time anyone had validated his value outside of his technical brewing skill in months. He didn't see the cold lawyer anymore. He saw the fierce, brilliant woman who was fighting beside him, driven by a deep need for truth, even if she wouldn't admit it was personal. Julian managed a wry smile, holding up the brass key. This old thing is good for more than just opening doors, Miss Petrova. Sometimes you have to know where the bodies are buried to find the treasure. Anya stared at him for a long moment, the warmth receding, the mask settling back into place, but the air between them had shifted. It was thinner now, charged with a new, dangerous awareness. She cleared her throat and pushed the new evidence file across the table. We have the leverage we need, Mr. Holloway, she said, professional composure restored. But David is not a fool. He will fight this. Tomorrow we draft the demand to purchase his controlling shares. This is where the real battle begins. Anya and Julian served David the formal demand to purchase his controlling shares, citing the documented misuse of corporate funds. The reaction was volcanic. David didn't just refuse. He launched a scorched earth counterattack intended to dismantle Julian's credibility and the very foundation of Evelyn's trust. He sent a preemptive memo to the key investors and distributors, Mr. Holloway, Anya reported, her voice clipped, holding a stack of vitriolic emails. He's painting you as an emotional liability, a reckless artisanal purist who nearly bankrupted the company 10 years ago with an experimental sour mash. He's claiming your inheritance is a desperate attempt to seize control and indulge in vanity projects. Julian felt the blood drain from his face, the old wounds of inadequacy tearing open. He remembered the sour mash debacle, a noble failure but a failure nonetheless, and the shame of David bailing him out. David's words, though distorted, carried the ring of a truth Julian had internalized long ago. You're holding us back. It's a lie mostly, Julian muttered, sinking into the ergonomic conference chair. The sour mash was high risk, but it's what put us on the map initially. David just doesn't understand innovation. He trailed off, looking down at his hands, the hands that now felt clumsy and useless. But what if he's right, Anya? About me being reckless? Maybe I don't know how to run a business. Maybe I'm just a brewer, good for smelling hops and nothing else. Julian's denial, succumbing to the antagonist's negative narrative about his competence. Anya dropped the stack of emails onto the desk, the loud rustle of paper shattering the professional calm. Her ice blue eyes fixed on him, blazing with an unfamiliar intensity that wasn't legal strategy. It felt personal. Stop, she commanded. The single word was forceful, startling him. That is precisely what he wants you to believe. That is the definition of gaslighting, Mr. Holloway. David is drowning in commercial debt. We have the documentation. He is attempting to weaponize your insecurity because he knows we have him cornered. You don't get it. Julian retorted, pushing himself up, pacing the tight confines of the room. He's my brother. He has always been the smart one, the responsible one. I was the dreamer. Every time I tried to step up, I made a mess. The sour mash. That catering fiasco. Maybe my purpose was just to make the beer and keep my mouth shut. The money doesn't make me a CEO, it just makes me rich and clueless. Anya watched him, the heavy subtext of her own denial thrumming in the air. She wanted to reassure him, to point out the undeniable evidence of his expertise that led to their current leverage. But vulnerability was a weakness she couldn't afford, professionally or personally. She saw the emotional tremor in him and it scared her. It was a messy, unprofessional distraction from the objective facts. She retreated behind her most reliable defense, cold logic. Anya's resistance and denial, pushing back against emotional connection. Your emotional history is irrelevant to the commercial code, Julian, she said, reverting instantly to formal distance. My job is to secure the business, not to coddle your ego. You will focus on the facts. David committed fraud. We have the data. If you insist on undermining your own authority with this self-pity, I will be forced to exercise the trust's contingency clause and appoint a temporary outside manager. Do you understand the implication? You will lose the ability to control the brewery's operations, forever ceding control to a committee. That is the cost of sentimentality, Mr. Holloway. The swift, brutal severity of her response was like a physical shield thrown up between them. Julian flinched, recognizing the professional threat was real. He felt a sharp surge of anger at her coldness. Is that what this is about, Anya? He asked, using her first name deliberately, forcing a flicker of emotion in her rigid composure. Is everything a transaction for you? Is there anything you value that can't be quantified or controlled in a boardroom? You're so busy guarding yourself you don't even realize you're turning into him, into David, cold, efficient, and utterly heartless. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted by the insult. Anya didn't move. She didn't look away, but the icy blue of her eyes seemed to deepen, reflecting a sudden, profound hurt. Her hand rested on the edge of the polished mahogany desk, her knuckles white. Heavy subtext and meaningful silence. I value survival, Julian, she finally replied, her voice dangerously quiet, slow pacing in the vulnerable moment. And I value not being ruined by the carelessness of others. Those are things you learn when you've had everything taken away. If being heartless is what keeps me safe and allows me to fulfill my duty to your grandmother's legacy, which by the way you are currently jeopardizing with your emotional weakness, then I accept the label. Julian saw the faint tremor in her jaw, the brief exposure of a fear that mirrored his own, the fear of being ruined. He realized his accusation had been too cruel, hitting a truth she desperately hid. His anger deflated, replaced by an uncomfortable curiosity about the guarded life she led. He pulled the brass skeleton key from his pocket, running his thumb over the worn edges. It was a tangible link to his grandmother's heart and the honest work he cherished, a silent symbol of the legacy he was fighting for. He put it back, looking at Anya, who was already back to reviewing the loan documents, her face shuddered. I won't let him win, Anya, Julian said, his voice softer but determined. I'm sorry. I won't let him push me out of this fight. But don't pretend this is just about money. It's about truth. And I think deep down that matters to you too. Flawed but lovable characters. Julian retracts the insult but pushes the truth. Anya didn't look up. Draft the letter of intent to appeal the valuation, Julian. We have a lot of work to do. Her silence was her resistance, her denial of the shared space and the sudden, intense exchange that had just taken place. She was retreating into the safety of her role. David's legal team, employing tactics of obfuscation and delay, refused to hand over critical operational documents. The original supply contracts, handwritten quality logs Julian had maintained for years, and the old customer database. They claimed the documents were in storage and inaccessible. Anya, however, suspected David was purging evidence. We need those quality logs, Julian, Anya stated firmly. They detail the exact measurements of malt, yeast, and water profiles we need to prove the historical value of the brand, contrasting it with David's current cost-cutting ratios. Since they're being deliberately withheld, we have no choice but to retrieve them ourselves. Julian knew exactly where they were, the dusty, decommissioned ledger room beside the old keg line, a space David never bothered with. It was dark, cramped, and smelled faintly of stale beer and old paper. The following night, under the cold cover of a half-moon, Julian and Anya met outside the back entrance of the Copper Kettle. Julian wore jeans and a hoodie. Anya, despite the late hour and the clandestine nature of the trip, was in a pristine navy trench coat over her sharp suit. Vivid sensory details. The contrast in their attire highlights the contrast in their worlds. This feels highly irregular, Anya murmured, adjusting the briefcase she held, which contained not files but a heavy-duty flashlight. It's called an inventory check, Miss Petrova, Julian replied, a wry smile touching his lips. He picked the lock on the rusted utility door using a trick his grandmother taught him. A thin, well-oiled shim, not his brass key which felt too sacred for this trespass. Besides, it's my domain. I know the blind spots in David's security system better than his rent-a-cop. They slipped inside. The brewery was silent, vast, and echoing. The smell of hops was still there, but muted, overlaid with the metallic tang of machinery running cold. Julian flipped a switch, bathing the cavernous fermentation hall in dim, utilitarian lighting. As they moved toward the back, Julian had to guide Anya through the labyrinth of empty pallets and coiled hoses. Anya, typically so composed and vertically aligned in her office, looked awkward and out of place, her expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the concrete floor. Careful, Julian murmured, catching her elbow as she stumbled slightly near a massive looming stainless steel tank. The brief, unexpected physical contact was instantaneous, a tiny electric jolt that passed between them before he released her. Heavy subtext, the physical proximity begins to break the walls. When they finally reached the ledger room, it was exactly as Julian remembered, dusty, cluttered, and faintly damp. Julian crouched, pulling open a heavy, squeaky file cabinet drawer. They should be here. The quality control logs from 12 to 19. Anya knelt beside him, an act of physical submission to the task that was completely at odds with her corporate persona. A fine layer of gray dust settled on the shoulder of her navy coat. She coughed softly, discreetly. Julian, she said, using his first name without realizing it, her breath close to his ear in the small space. I need you to confirm the handwriting. We must establish these are legitimate documents, not copies. They worked shoulder to shoulder, the proximity unavoidable. As Julian flipped through the logs, pointing out his distinctive, cramped handwriting. Anya's attention shifted. She was looking not just at the records, but at the genuine, quiet reverence Julian showed for the past. He didn't just see numbers, he saw the history of a successful batch, the struggle of a particular season. Your grandmother taught me everything about the process, Julian said quietly, wiping dust from a cover sheet. She used to say, the beer remembers Julian. You just have to listen to the logs. Anya paused, tracing the faded ink of Evelyn's original signature on a quarterly report. She was a very smart woman, your grandmother. She understood true value isn't always liquid assets. Slow pacing in vulnerable moments. The sound of the utility door slamming shut and a heavy thunk of a deadbolt engaging suddenly echoed through the silent warehouse. Both of them froze. Julian grabbed his phone. No signal. What was that? David must have remotely activated the old magnetic lock system, Anya whispered, standing quickly, dusting off her coat with sharp, agitated motions. He must have been monitoring the entry codes. We're locked in. The system won't cycle until 6 a.m. Anya tried her own phone, also dead, the steel structure acting as a Faraday cage. The shock and frustration were evident in her rigid posture. She was trapped, powerless, and outside of her element. Show don't tell, the lack of control is terrifying for Anya. It's just for a few hours, Julian said, trying to inject some calm into the sudden tension. We're safe. We have food from the break room vending machine. We just have to wait. He watched her pace, a nervous, restless energy that Julian had never seen her display. She stopped, leaning her forehead against a cold, stainless steel tank. The faint scent of stale hops mixed with her crisp citrus perfume. I hate this, Anya admitted, her voice low, raw, utterly devoid of professional pretense. I hate being unable to control the environment. I hate being dependent on luck or circumstance. I hate feeling trapped. That's why you built the walls so high in your office, isn't it? Julian asked softly, approaching her slowly. To keep the chaos out. She turned, her ice blue eyes reflecting the dim light, and for the first time, Julian saw a flash of fear that was personal, not legal. My parents relied on luck and chaos, she said, the words heavy with untold history, a hint of the backstory to come in Act 5. They were artists, brilliant but careless. They lost everything, including the roof over our heads, because they refused to see the reality of the balance sheet. I swore I would never be like them. Never. Control is the only way to ensure survival. Julian looked at her, the dust on her coat, the deep, personal pain suddenly visible in her eyes. He didn't see the cold, controlling lawyer anymore. He saw a frightened young woman who had built her entire professional life on a fear of poverty and loss. He reached out, not to touch her but just to indicate his presence. Anya, we're in this together. And control isn't everything. Sometimes the unexpected path is the best one. She met his gaze, the heavy subtext between them now so thick it was almost tangible. The small, echoing brewery, the quiet hum of the inactive machinery, the shared fear of David's escalation. It all created an intimacy Julian hadn't expected. For the first time she smiled, a brief, genuine, tired expression that transformed her face entirely. I suppose, she conceded, the professional armor temporarily abandoned. She picked up a dusty, forgotten bottle of his best imperial stout from a nearby shelf. How are you on cold beer? They sat on overturned, empty kegs in the cavernous, quiet fermentation hall, the silence punctuated by the faint, slow tick of cooling machinery. The shared imperial stout was cold and bitter, a grounding anchor in the unexpected intimacy of their predicament. Julian had brought an old, slightly musty blanket from the break room. Artists, Anya finally said, staring at the label on the stout bottle, the stylized copper kettle logo. You asked why I value survival and control. My parents were brilliant, Julie. My mother was a sculptor, my father a poet. They believed in the purity of the impulse, the rejection of the material world. They taught me to find beauty in chaos. Julian waited, sensing the fragility beneath the legal armor. Deep, authentic, emotional dialogue. But chaos, Julian, has a cruel price tag, she continued, her voice low and even, but heavy with slow pacing in the vulnerable moment. We were always 1 month, one missed commission, one breach of contract away from losing everything. When I was 17, my father signed a document he didn't read. It cost us our home, our savings, and his reputation. The sheer, careless lack of attention to the details, the legal framework that holds the world together, it ruined them. It ruined us. Anya took a small, careful sip of the beer, a rare, uncharacteristic indulgence. That was the day I understood. Emotion is a liability. Love is expensive. To survive, you must quantify, you must control the environment, and you must never, ever rely on the hope that things will simply work out. I don't seek money, Julian. I seek impenetrability. I build walls that can't be breached by sentimentality or careless mistakes. She looked at him, her ice blue gaze searching his face. You see me as cold, but I see myself as someone who knows the true cost of not being cold enough. Flawed but lovable characters. Anya's flaw, over-control, is revealed as a survival mechanism. Julian nodded slowly, understanding clicking into place. Her entire rigid worldview was a defense mechanism built on trauma. My grandmother Evelyn. She was an artist too, Julian offered, holding up the brass skeleton key from his pocket, the repeating emotional symbol. A craft artist. A brewer is just a very specific kind of chemist and an artist who works with bacteria and time. She taught me that the best beer isn't about perfection, it's about trust. Trust in the yeast to convert the sugars. Trust in the temperature to hold. Trust in your gut when the logbook says otherwise. David, Julian continued, the name carrying a heavy weight, he hated that philosophy. My father, who bankrolled the expansion, always saw David as the sensible heir. The MBA. David measured success in P&L statements. He'd look at the steam in the bubbling fermenters and just see wasted energy. I was the one who saw the magic, the soul. When I was fired, it wasn't just losing a job. It was David telling me my entire value system, Evelyn's legacy, was irrelevant. That the artist had no place in the business. The money is just the weapon to fight that lie. The business, Anya, is the proof that passion and profit aren't mutually exclusive. He paused, looking at the silent, huge stainless steel tanks around them. I'm reckless, yes. I let my heart lead. But David is devoid of soul, and that's a different kind of ruin. The kind that destroys the product from the inside out. Anya listened intently. Julian was reckless, but his recklessness was fueled by deep, unwavering integrity. He wasn't foolish, he was passionate. She realized the reason she hadn't dismissed him, why she continued to fight so fiercely on his behalf, wasn't just the trust's mandate. It was his authenticity. He wasn't a corporate shark, he was a man driven by love. Love for his craft, love for his grandmother. Your grandmother gave you this trust for a reason, Anya murmured. She knew you needed the resources to fight for the soul of the business. And she paired you with me, the embodiment of the control you lack. She gave a tired, cynical half-smile. She engineered this merger. She wanted you to understand that passion needs structure, and structure needs heart. And what do you need, Anya? Julian asked, his voice low, stepping closer to her, the dark of the brewery swallowing the sound. You've built this perfect, impenetrable life. But when you talk about your parents, I see the girl who was scared, not the woman who built the fortress. What happens when the fortress is enough? Anya met his gaze, the professional distance finally dissolving, stripped away by the shared cold, the shared beer and the shared truth. She had only ever sought control as a means to safety. But sitting next to Julian, feeling the genuine warmth of his concern and his deep, messy passion, she realized that control had become its own cage. She needed something real, something that resonated deeper than a signed contract. She didn't answer the question, but the lengthy, meaningful silence between them was the answer. Heavy subtext and meaningful silence. The quiet hum of the ventilation system was the only witness to the palpable shift in the air. The lawyer and the brewer, the cold logic and the warm heart, had found their unlikely point of collision. Their relationship was no longer just a professional necessity, it was an emotional one, forged in the ashes of their pasts. Armed with Julian's dusty quality control logs and Anya's brilliant legal architecture, the appeal to the arbitration board was successful. The evidence of David's asset manipulation and fraudulent expense claims was irrefutable. The arbitrator issued a binding directive. David had 72 hours to accept the terms of the buyout, or face criminal investigation and total forfeiture of his shares. The victory was decisive, earned by the unlikely synergy of Julian's passionate intuition and Anya's ruthless precision. Julian was waiting for Anya outside her office building late that Thursday evening. Instead of his hoodie, he wore a crisp, dark shirt, a deliberate effort to meet her halfway. Anya emerged, carrying only a clutch purse instead of her usual heavy briefcase. The severity of her ponytail had softened. A few strands framed her face. We did it, Miss Petrova, Julian said, the relief in his voice palpable. Anya stopped, looking up at the high, cold tower that housed her firm. She closed her eyes briefly, a flicker of pure, unadulterated release crossing her face. Yes, Julian. We held the line. We made truth stick. I couldn't have done it without you, he admitted simply. Your understanding of the impenetrability of a legal argument, it was exactly what I needed to fight David's arrogance. Anya met his gaze, the formality of her posture finally cracking. And I, she admitted, her voice low and honest, could not have found the lever without your willingness to trust your gut. You taught me that sometimes, the heart knows where the crucial evidence is buried, long before the spreadsheet does. Deep, authentic, emotional dialogue, mutual validation cementing the bond. Julian gestured to the quiet street. I know a place that sells incredible, greasy cheeseburgers and the world's most decadent milkshakes. No spreadsheets, no legal jargon. Just victory. Are you game? Anya hesitated for only a second, a choice between her guarded routine and the pull of the unexpected. The pull won. I haven't had a milkshake since I was 11, Julian. Lead the way. The Greasy Spoon Diner was the antithesis of Sterling and Thorne. The air was warm, smelling of frying onions and sugar. They sat in a booth with worn red vinyl, the light soft and forgiving. Anya, stripped of her professional context, was unexpectedly charming. She asked about his favorite brewing process, his grandmother's habits, and his true hopes for the copper kettle. Julian listened to her talk about her youth, the thrill of winning a case based on moral truth, and the quiet satisfaction of mastering a complex legal code. My mother used to tell me I was too rigid, Anya confessed, swirling the frothy caramel of her milkshake. She said I needed to let go of the reins. But letting go meant risking the fall. Maybe, Julian mused, running the brass key, the repeating emotional symbol, between his fingers under the table, it's not about letting go entirely. It's about knowing who you can trust to hold the other side of the rope. You have the control, Anya. I have the trust. He looked up, meeting her eyes with a directness that was simultaneously gentle and challenging. That's what Evelyn engineered, wasn't it? She gave me the heart and she paired it with your structure. We aren't just partners in this buyout, we're two halves of the necessary equation. Repeating emotional phrases, the theme of trust versus control. Anya's smile faded, replaced by a deep, thoughtful expression. She realized that the initial almost accidental physical proximity of the brewery, Act 4, had matured into an emotional proximity that she actively craved. The vulnerability she had shown in Act 5 wasn't exploited, it was cherished. Julian was the only person who had ever seen the scared girl beneath the armor and treated her with deep, unyielding respect. She reached out, her fingers resting lightly on the tabletop near his hand, a tangible gesture of connection. I have spent my entire adult life making sure I never need anyone, Julian. Not for comfort, not for advice, and certainly not to validate my worth. It's an unsustainable way to live, I realize. But it's the only way I know. Show don't tell, the physical gesture and the halting admission of fear solidify the bond. Then maybe, Julian countered, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It's time to learn a new way. A way where sharing the weight makes both sides stronger, not weaker. The air thickened, the noise of the diner fading into a dull, comforting background hum. This moment, bathed in the soft, neon glow, was the culmination of weeks of shared stress, conflict and sudden, painful vulnerability. Anya, the woman who only dealt in irrefutable contracts, found herself in the presence of an undeniable emotional truth. She finally reached across the table and covered the hand that held the brass key. Her touch was warm, firm and deliberate. You're dangerous, Julian Holloway, she said, but her tone held no threat, only profound acceptance. Finding your balance in a relationship, the control, the trust, the heart, and the structure is often a struggle. Have you ever found an unlikely partner who completed your equation? Let us know in the comments below. The legal victory against David was official, with someone who was your complete opposite. David's signature you know to transfer the controlling shares to Julian and Anya discovered. David, his face pale and eyes blazing with cold hatred, taught you delayed until the final hour in the comments ensuring the process was agonizingly drawn out. He knew he couldn't win the business war, so he focused on the personal one. A day before the closing, David executed his final malicious maneuver. He didn't leak it to the press. He delivered the information directly, neatly packaged, to Julian's email and to the managing partner at Sterling and Thorne. The package contained records detailing a past scandal involving Anya. 5 years ago she had been heavily criticized and narrowly avoided disbarment for her involvement in a high-profile corporate bankruptcy case. The files implied she had prioritized a crucial high-fee client's solvency over the moral well-being of the secondary, smaller business owners, a clear contradiction of the integrity she preached to Julian. The implication David carefully planted was that Anya had leveraged Julian's family trust, a low-profile, high-liquidity asset, as a means to politically rehabilitate herself within her firm by demonstrating absolute, ruthless success, regardless of the emotional cost. Julian was sitting in his kitchen when he read the summary David attached. Anya Petrova doesn't care about the craft, Julian. She cares about control and career. You are just a stepping stone for her redemption. The betrayal was immediate and brutal, hitting Julian precisely where he was weakest. His deep-seated fear of being seen as merely a sentimental fool, easily manipulated. His old narrative, "You're reckless, Julian, a liability," roared back to life, now aimed not at his brewing but at his judgment of character. The deep emotional bonding of Act 6 fractured instantly. Heavy subtext. Julian's past insecurity is weaponized against his present trust. Julian drove straight to Anya's firm, bypassing the receptionist and marching straight to her office. Anya looked up, her expression tired but victorious. She saw the folded printouts Julian held, and her face went utterly still, recognizing the shadow of her past. It's done, Julian, she said quietly, her professional armor immediately sliding back into place. The transfer is clean. David signed under duress. We won. Did we? Julian's voice was strained, tight with suppressed pain. He slammed the papers onto her desk. This is the truth about the insolvency case 5 years ago? That you sacrificed the smaller investors to save the major client and your reputation? That you chose money over integrity? Anya didn't defend herself, didn't explain the complex legal maneuvers or the immense pressure she was under. She looked at the accusatory fire in Julian's eyes and saw the instant, unyielding lack of faith. It was the same verdict her father had received years ago, guilty until proven innocent and even then still judged. Her personal trauma, the fear of being ruined by trust, surfaced immediately. It was a complex corporate restructuring, Anya replied, her voice dangerously flat. Everything I did was legally sound. I acted in the best interest of my primary client, as was my mandate. Your mandate, Julian repeated bitterly. That's always the answer, isn't it? Control and mandate. You told me you valued truth. You told me the control was about survival. But David says you just saw this trust as a way to fix your reputation, to show your firm you could take a volatile case, secure an asset, and get out clean. Was everything we shared, the brewery, the key, the talk about heart, just part of your strategy? The emotional window dressing needed to manipulate the sentimental fool? Deep, authentic, emotional dialogue focused on accusations. Anya stood, pushing her chair back sharply, the scrape of wood against the floor the only sound. She was deeply wounded, not by David's smear, but by Julian's instant assumption of malice. Show don't tell, Anya's visible retreat. You know what my strategy was, Julian? She challenged, her eyes cold, devoid of the warmth he'd glimpsed in Act 6. My strategy was to do the job your grandmother hired me for. My strategy was to ensure her $2 million was not wasted by your emotional reactivity, which you are proving right now is a constant liability. You asked if this was just a transaction. Yes, it was a fiduciary transaction. And since the transaction is complete, my duty is fulfilled. She walked around the desk, stopping before him, her whole body radiating professional termination. We won the brewery. You have full control. I have executed the trust perfectly. Any personal connection you perceived was secondary to the mandate. It stops now. I have no need for sentimental vanity projects or unstable emotional partners. The words were brutal, designed to match the force of his accusation, but they shattered the delicate connection between them. Julian saw the return of the impenetrable fortress, taller, thicker, and colder than ever. She had chosen control over connection, fear over trust. I won the business back, Julian whispered, the exhilaration of victory now crushed by an overwhelming sense of loss. But I just paid the highest price I could imagine. He turned, leaving the office without another word. Anya stood in the center of the room, her composure iron, her eyes dry, watching him go. Once the door clicked shut, she sank back into her chair, pressing her fingertips hard against her temples, fighting the profound, agonizing need to call him back and explain the nuanced legal truth David had twisted. but her control held fast. She would rather be judged as cold than revealed as vulnerable. Julian drove back to the brewery, which was officially his again. He walked through the silent, enormous space, now empty of his brother's presence but also empty of Anya's unexpected, necessary presence. He picked up the brass key, the symbol of his legacy, but it felt heavy, cold, and meaningless in his hand. He had the business, but the unexpected love that had blossomed in the shadows was gone, destroyed by mistrust and their own flawed defenses. This was the darkest moment. For 2 days, Julian was lost in the vast, silent cathedral of the copper kettle. He walked the floor, the polished steel of the tanks reflecting his hollow face. He held the brass key, the weight of the brewery's legacy heavy in his palm. He had won the battle, but he had betrayed the only person who understood the cost. The silence was deafening, amplified by the absence of Anya's sharp, necessary presence. He spent hours reviewing the documents David had sent, not with the emotional bias of a wrong partner, but with the analytical detachment Anya had taught him. He looked past the inflammatory headlines and focused on the legal details of the old corporate bankruptcy. He saw the intricate knot of liabilities, the impossible choices, and the technical brilliance required to navigate the crisis legally. The truth wasn't that she was heartless. It was that she was terrified of failure and had chosen the path of maximum professional control and minimal personal exposure, the very flaw she had shared with him in Act 5. The realization hit him like a physical blow. David hadn't just wanted to destroy the business. He wanted to destroy the trust between Julian and Anya, knowing that lack of faith was Julian's most significant vulnerability. Julian's instantaneous recoil in Act 7, the moment he assumed the worst, was his ultimate failing. He had replicated his brother's dismissiveness, judging Anya's character based on a spreadsheet instead of her heart. The brass key felt suddenly warm. Evelyn hadn't paired Julian with Anya just to save his money. She had paired his trust with Anya's control to teach them both how to be whole. Julian knew the trust agreement contained a clause. Upon securing the assets, he had the right to petition the board to remove the trustee and appoint a successor, or to dissolve the trusteeship entirely, claiming complete self-sufficiency. The easy, safe, and logical choice, the choice David would applaud, was to remove Anya, sever the painful emotional tie, and run the brewery solo. But that, Julian realized, would be the greatest betrayal of Evelyn's intent and his own heart. It would mean choosing control over trust, forever living inside the cage of his own suspicion. He found Anya late Friday afternoon in the court archives downtown, meticulously cross-referencing old property deeds, back in her armor, back in her fortress. She was precisely where she felt safest, surrounded by impenetrable law. "I need to talk to you," Julian said, his voice quiet but commanding. Anya didn't look up immediately. "If this is about the trust, Julian, you have until Monday to file the paperwork regarding my continuation or termination. I have prepared a full brief on both scenarios. Emotionally, I would advise termination. Legally, I advise my continuation until the debt refinancing is stable." "I'm not talking about the trust's mandate," Julian said, pulling a chair across the aisle and sitting opposite her. "I'm talking about my mistake. My recklessness." He set the brass key gently on the old wooden table between them, repeating emotional symbol. "I used David's smear to justify my own insecurity, Anya. I let the fear that I'm just a sentimental fool make me assume the worst about the only person who has ever truly fought for me. I accused you of being heartless when I know because you told me that you built those walls to protect yourself from a history of being abandoned and ruined." Deep, authentic dialogue, Julian's apology and reckoning with his own flaw. He leaned forward. "You told me in Act 5 that you value impenetrability. You said that control ensures survival. I understand that. But I'm asking you to accept something you can't control, something you can't quantify." He picked up the key. "I am not filing the paperwork to remove you. I am not petitioning for the trust to be dissolved. I want you to stay as the permanent trustee. Not because the legal document compels me but because I am consciously choosing to trust your integrity, your heart, your principles, over the safe certainty of a signed contract. I trust you, Anya Petrova, with my legacy, my business, and my life. That is my reckoning. I may lose the trust's financial backing if you fail, but if I lose faith in you, I lose myself." The choice, the dramatic, public gesture of trust. Anya finally looked up, her ice blue eyes wide, stunned. The meticulous facade she had maintained since Act 7 wavered. Julian wasn't just apologizing. He was offering her the ultimate gift, the permission to be vulnerable and the protection of absolute faith. She, who had built her life on controlling others' variables, was being asked to accept control over the one man who had seen through her armor. "Julian," she whispered, her voice husky. "That is the most reckless thing you could possibly do." "It's also the truest thing I could do," he countered, a gentle smile returning to his face. "We are both flawed. But together, Anya, we make sense. I'm asking you to stop being the warden and start being the partner. I'm asking you to trust my trust." She stared at the brass key, then at Julian's earnest, open face. The weight of his unearned faith settled upon her, heavier and more profound than any legal brief. The fortress she had built suddenly felt less like protection and more like a crushing burden. She had pushed him away out of fear, and he had responded by offering her the only thing she had ever truly wanted, unwavering, unconditional acceptance. Flawed but lovable characters. Anya's armor cracks as she confronts the generosity of Julian's choice. Anya sat across from Julian in the quiet archive room, the brass key glinting under the fluorescent light between them. The choice he had presented, to trust her with his future, despite her flawed past and his own ingrained mistrust, was an act of faith she had never witnessed, let alone received. He was asking her to dismantle the fortress she had spent a lifetime building. Slowly, carefully, Anya reached out and enclosed her hand around his, covering the key. The professional distance, the legal formality, was gone, replaced by the profound vulnerability of true connection. "Julian," she said, her voice trembling slightly, a sound he had never heard from her before. My first mentor told me that a good lawyer knows the law, but a great lawyer knows when to trust the client. I thought I was a great lawyer because I was infallible. But you've taught me that sometimes, the greatest strength is admitting you need help, and allowing yourself to be known. Slow pacing in vulnerable moments, the acceptance of her flaw. She squeezed his hand. I accept, Julian. I accept the trust, the brewery, and the recklessness of your faith. And I promise you I will fight for us, for our structure and our heart, with every legal tool at my disposal, and with the integrity I fought so hard to protect. I stop running now. Julian felt a wave of profound relief and triumph wash over him, greater than any legal victory. He had risked his legacy and won the only prize that truly mattered, Anya's guarded heart. 6 months later, the copper kettle was no longer just a business. It was a flourishing testament to the perfect partnership. Julian, the master brewer, had returned to his craft with renewed vigor, restoring the high-quality malt suppliers and reintroducing specialty brews focused on Evelyn's original, complex recipes. The brewery floor, now filled with the rich, warm scent of premium ingredients and bubbling fermenters, hummed with efficient, joyful purpose. Anya, now officially Julian's permanent trustee and the brewery's chief financial strategist, hadn't softened her professionalism, but she had directed her intensity toward creation, not defense. She had successfully restructured the crippling debt David had accumulated and, more importantly, had instituted fair contracts with every vendor, supplier, and distributor. Julian's trust in the product was finally matched by Anya's control of the budget. David, having signed the final papers, had moved away. He sent a single, terse email 6 months after the transition. The valuation is holding. You and Petrova are surprisingly competent. Tell Julian to stop wasting money on those ridiculous French oak barrels. It was the closest he would ever come to an apology or a compliment, and Julian deleted it with a smile, finally free of his brother's shadow. Julian and Anya stood in the newly renovated tasting room one clear Saturday afternoon. The room, which David had wanted to convert into office space, was now a warm, intimate space filled with the laughter of customers enjoying the restored copper kettle craft. The numbers are spectacular, Julian, Anya said, reviewing a quarterly report on her tablet. She wore a tailored suit, but her demeanor was relaxed, her ice blue eyes warm. Your new Imperial Stout has doubled projections. It proves that integrity sells. It proves that I have the best partner in the world, Julian corrected, stepping behind her and resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. He inhaled the crisp scent of her perfume, now a comforting mix with the earthy smell of the brewery. You gave my passion a purpose, Anya, and you gave me back my worth. Anya leaned back into his touch, a small, genuine smile curving her lips. And you gave my structure a heart, Julian. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the prerequisite for true connection. I still value control, but now I choose to control our future, together. Julian turned her to face him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old brass skeleton key. It was still tarnished, still heavy, but now polished from constant handling. This key, Julian began, his voice thick with emotion. It opens the oldest part of the brewhouse, where Evelyn brewed the first batch. It's the key to the legacy, the heart of the craft, and the symbol of my identity. He took her left hand, placing the heavy, cool metal key into her palm and gently curling her fingers around it. Repeating emotional symbol, the final transfer of trust. I gave you my professional trust in Act 8, but that was just the preamble, he said softly, gazing into her eyes. Anya Petrova, I want you to have the key to everything that is truly mine. Not just the business. I love your control, your strength, your brilliance, and the fragile, precious heart you showed me in the dark. I love you. A single, crystalline tear tracked down Anya's cheek, the ultimate sign of the fortress being successfully breached by love. She didn't wipe it away. When I first met you, Julian, she murmured, her hand clutching the key, I believed love was an expensive liability. Now I see it's the most valuable, irreplaceable asset. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. A kiss that was not tentative or forced, but deep, warm, and absolute, sealing the deal they had struck not in a legal brief, but in the silence of a dusty brewery. The artist and the analyst, the heart and the structure, the reckless brewer and the careful lawyer, they had found their perfect, unexpected union. They had turned betrayal and disaster into the foundation of a lifetime. Love, messy, illogical, and utterly imperative, had won at last. If you've ever found true partnership with someone who is your complete opposite, you know the powerful balance Julian and Anya discovered. Tell us what essential lesson your partner taught you about life and love in the comments below. You stuck with this incredible journey of hope, redemption, and life-changing kindness all the way to the very end. That tells us you believe in the power of these stories just as much as we do. If you have watched this far, you are officially part of our community. Do not forget to like this video right now to show your support, and subscribe to our channel before you go. We promise to bring you more stories that will move your heart. We'll see you in the next one.